So for those of you new to ITSM Academy, here's just a quick overview. ITSM Academy is a full-service provider of IT service management certification and education. We develop all content in-house, and that includes all ITIL education as well as process design, Agile, and DevOps. Since 2003, we've trained and certified tens of thousands of students. Now let me introduce today's speakers. JT Gary is CEO and co-founder of nClouds. He has been solving complex operation challenges for Silicon Valley-based startups and enterprises for 12 years and is a prior DevOps consultant, network engineer, systems architect, and sysadmin. He co-founded nClouds, an award-winning provider of DevOps and cloud professional services, solutions, and products, including NOps for cloud, IT change management, and specializing in modern infrastructures. nClouds, is a certified AWS Advanced Consulting, MSP, DevOps, and approved, well-architected partner with over 250 DevOps AWS implementations, over 500 deployed pipelines, and over 10,000 managed servers. nClouds was named CIO Review 20 Most Promising ITSM Solution Providers for 2017, DevOps Dozen, Best New DevOps Solution Company in 2017, and HFS Hot Vendor for 2018. Good morning, JT.
Good morning.
Good morning. And let me introduce Clive. Clive D'Souza is global head of business development for Service Catalog at Amazon Web Services. He leads worldwide business development for AWS Service Catalog that allows organizations to create and manage catalogs of IT services that are approved for use on AWS. He has 15+ years of industry experience leading the execution of products to industry-leading positions. He has extensive background in product marketing, sales enablement, and strategic planning. Earlier in his career, Clive held numerous technical roles, including systems engineer on flight control systems, software engineer, and solution architect. He earned a master's in computer systems engineering, an MBA in global leadership, and has attended leadership training at MIT Sloan. For 12 years, Amazon Web Services has been the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform. Good morning, Clive.
Good morning.
Good morning. And JT, are you ready for me to make you the presenter?
Yes, I am. Great. Thank you, Karen. I'm very excited about today's webinar. DevOps and change management are two of my favorite topics. And I feel passionate about DevOps because I feel like it promises to bring people together. And anytime you can have people coming together and work as a team, amazing things happen. So 3 things you should learn from today's webinar. 1, how public cloud empowers rapid innovation. And then we'll talk about how modern change management could help to solve that governance versus speed tug of war between IT and dev. I've been on the operations side for most of my career. My responsibility has always been stability and reliability. So we believe that change management could really help to ease that tension between IT and dev. And then we'll Clive will talk about Service Catalog. Basically, according to the poll, one of the biggest pain point for this audience is around compliance and visibility. Service Catalog can really help you to achieve that. So let's get started, and maybe we could start with cloud and innovation. The common agreement across everyone right now is that cloud enable innovation. And the reason it enables innovation is because it enables new capabilities, new service capabilities like cloud continuous delivery, which is sort of the prerequisite for DevOps. Once you're delivering value to your customer frequently and in consistent manner, you are delivering value where customer is seeing that and your company is able to innovate fast. So cloud is sort of a enabler and enabling your teams to innovate at speed. And the landscape looks something like this currently, and this kind of resonates with some of the answers we got from the poll earlier, most of the time businesses are moving to the cloud because they want that agility, that faster idea to cache. And IT is want to move to the cloud because they want reliability, they want performance, and they want to acquire resources when they need it, not just buy in bulk before even knowing the demand. And also user expectations has changed. If you think about it, when I first started in operation, it was totally fine thing to do to bring your infrastructure down, deploy the code, and then bring it back up, right? It was totally expected, but nowadays you can't really do that. So all this driving the move to the cloud, but this is also actually posing a new set of challenges which are kind of unique to the cloud. When in the beginning, when on-prem environment, when I was in operation, we were the only people who made all the changes in the cloud environment, I mean in the on-prem environment. But now most of the companies have multiple engineers who are making changes, and the complexity of environment is also is pretty high because you're making far frequent changes, and there's far more people making changes. Because of that, it just makes it very hard to kind of track changes and kind of figure out who's doing what. So it's posing some new challenges, and which are kind of unique to the cloud. The biggest one I hear from operation engineers is, hey, I have no visibility into who's doing what, and which is so true because there's not a single way to provision new resources or make changes. Some changes might come from Terraform, some might come from CloudFormation or Jenkins. The changes are coming from everywhere, so there's not a holistic process to kind of see which change is a good change and which change is a bad change. And what I mean by that is I can launch 100 servers and stop 99 of them. Now there's only one server, which is a delta. But since you have like hundreds of people making changes, it's kind of hard to see what is really changing. And because of that, there's a lot of implications on the cost. People will spin up resources and they'll forget to shut it down, and people will launch resources because cloud enables experimentation, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you have a change management process to make sure all the resources are being utilized at full capacity. Compliance is a major concern for most of the companies, and I have walked into companies where they're going through like a SOC audit, and they're still trying to do change management using spreadsheets, and which is very difficult. As I talked earlier, the number of changes in the cloud environment is very, very high. So trying to do this traditional way, it just makes it very hard. And because there's no ability and people don't have any change management process, so it makes the going through auditing process or compliance process very, very difficult. So,
excuse me, JT?
Yes.
JT, excuse me, it's Karen. I'm sorry, just because you're getting into this part in your presentation, when the polling question was my biggest pain point related to change management is cloud, they did end up putting in some information that I thought I should share with you.
Sure.
About the other. So it was individuals' resistance to any process, poor understanding of Scrum and release management, in quotes, because we've always done it this way. And then Deborah says, I represent the IT service desk. Knowing how to support cloud solutions differently than hosted is sometimes confusing for the support side. And then Maria, go ahead.
Hey, JT and Karen and Lisa. So we can kind of touch on that, but I think those are very standard and ever-present concerns being shared by pretty much all the customers going to the cloud. So we can definitely chat on that. And I think we are a couple of slides down, but those are very valid. And in fact, in many ways, it's reinforcing what we are seeing from customers.
Right. Okay, good. And there was one more that just said, and it's probably the same as well, lack of control over changes in scheduling.
Yeah, and Clive is going to touch on that because one of the things that some of the modern tools like Service Catalog on AWS allow you to go fast, but at the same time build control. So Clive's going to be touching on that in a little bit.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, but these questions kind of validate, majority of the questions and concern we get from our customers as well. And I think this is one of the main reasons we have to kind of reimagine what change management looks like in cloud environment. And we have to kind of start with the fact that cloud kind of changes everything, because it's not just one person who's making changes. It's not just operation people who will bring new hardware and we'll have to wait for 2-3 months. Most of the developers nowadays just have keys to provision new resources. But that does not mean that you should not have any process. And this is sort of a confusion in the market where people think if they're doing DevOps, they don't need process. That's simply not true. We do need process, and we can borrow from existing framework like ITSM, ITIL, Agile, and DevOps. And what cloud actually gives us is ability to automate, and it gives us ability to fail fast. We want people to experiment, and at the same time, you can, because the elasticity of the cloud, you can reduce your cost by implementing the change management and leveraging automation, and make security and compliance priority and make it part of the change management. This, we have to reimagine the change management process in ITSM for the cloud. So how you could do this? By leveraging modern change management with automation, you can allow your teams to go faster, and you can also make sure the cost is kind of managed proactively. This is not something that you can do after the fact, like one department is managing the cost. This should be how implemented as part of when people are making changes, and with the help of automation, you can tell them this is how much it's going to cost you, and also improve compliance and security. And one of the biggest pain point we see is when there's an incident, no one knows what changed. And the reason is because there are so many people making changes for so many various reasons for different workloads. So once you implement modern change management, you can actually correlate the issues as they happen, and you can quickly find out what change actually triggered that incident. So how do we do that? How do we get started with modern change management? Step one is to automate your whole change management process. If cloud enables anything, it's automation, and you can leverage that automation to increase the standardized changes, right? Over time, the standard changes should go up, and changes that require approval process should go down, and you should focus on increasing your standard changes, which also means that changes that come from GitHub, Jenkins, Terraform, CloudFormation, Service Catalog, all those changes should be automatically approved, and everything else should require an approval process. I'm going to talk about how we can make that approval process more accessible, so it's not tedious. And also leverage Service Catalog. And I believe that Service Catalog is one of the useful services on cloud, especially AWS Service Catalog, and one of the most underutilized services. And I believe that using Service Catalog, you can increase your standard changes, which you can give it to anyone, like marketing, sales, finance. And with help of Service Catalog, I feel like we'll be able to share these micro applications, which, for example, marketing and sales will be able to consume. And as more and more workload move to cloud, I feel like Service Catalog will play a major role. And also connect user stories to changes. And because it's so easy in the cloud to provision resources, sometimes people forget that what was the reason, what is the end customer value. So you want people to think in terms of user stories. That's why I believe the modern change management need to integrate with the tools people are used to, like Jira, where when you're creating a change, it should talk about what is the impact, what is the value it's going to add to the customer. If you can build that kind of culture, we believe you can establish a better change management process. We've also seen people leveraging strong policies and enforcing them with the help of automation in cloud environment. So what that really means is, let's say if someone launches an instance without adding proper tags, you can, in many cases, you can terminate those resources, just enforcing those policies. And this is sort of unique to cloud. You can, enforce these kind of policies in the cloud environment. And this is probably the most important point, is you have to make change management accessible to how your DevOps teams are working, which means, if they're used to working on Slack, make it easy where they can approve and request changes from Slack, or whether that be Jira and ServiceNow and BNC Remedy, whatever tool people are currently using, your DevOps team and your ITSM team are using, make it accessible for them to be able to request changes and approve changes. And these are the common characteristics of next generation ITSM teams. They are 8 times more likely to have ADDM deployed and asset management and change management type of process in place. And they're 2 times more likely to have Service Catalog deployed. And maybe this is a good segue to have Clive talk about Service Catalog. People have been using Service Catalog for years. I believe that in the cloud environment, that's where our Service Catalog has kind of changing how people consume resources. So Clive, it would be great if you can talk on Service Catalog.
Sure. Thank you, everybody, and it's great to be here. So I want to kind of jump in here and talk a little bit about Service Catalog in general, and then we'll start going down the actual cataloging services, if you will. So, and as JT was mentioning, taking a step back, even the journey onto the cloud from a pure IT or an ITSM perspective, it's always a question about a tug of war between 2 personas. One ends up being the operations side of the house, and then the other side of the house is the developers, the DevOps, who want agility. And essentially they want to go, quickly, within minutes, from the whiteboard to the keyboard, as opposed to waiting for months or weeks or many, many hours to get the instance of servers, right? So this is an ongoing battle. So what we are finding is, we first need to go define what a service catalog essentially is. It's essentially a very structured, it's a very prescriptive manner of all things ITSM. That includes management, that includes maintenance, that includes deployment of any services, which, the internal audience for that organization is a customer for. So you think of an IT administrator, and their customers are all the folks who are inside the organization. When you pivot that lens and we start looking at it from an AWS Service Catalog, we kind of take that to one level higher, right? And we deem as any customer who wants to deploy any resource into AWS. And that can be an AWS resource. It can be something which is homegrown, which we can wrap a CloudFormation template around it or a YAML template around it. And then we can add a whole bunch of other additional features. And then you can have 2 personas on that. So if you move to the next slide, JT. So this is where, we try to solve the problem. So we can help you go faster. We can help you simplify. At the same time, give you control. So if you look at this particular slide, the way you want to envision is that the big scheme of things on the left-hand side is the personas of your ITSM, your folks who are doing the actual management of software, the enabling of policies, enabling of governance, right? For them, what matters is if you, for instance, have a very specific image of a Red Hat or a Ubuntu or a unique flavor of Windows, that is the only one which is allowed inside the organization, right? So diving a little bit deeper, let's say you are in a financial services or a healthcare, you want to shut down certain ports, or you want to have a policy which is very prescriptive of a Sarbanes-Oxley, or it's very prescriptive of HIPAA or HL7. You can envision and you can then slap those policies on the image, and that is the only golden image which your DevOps, your developers downstream can ever access, right? Think of that as essentially as a mechanism to enforce those constraints and controls, right? And from the DevOps team side, what they really want to care about, in many ways we are finding, is that they want to have as minimum level of communication or contact with the IT. Because all they really care about is not about the actual infrastructure. They care about, hey, I want to get to this fast. I want to get to do this on my own without having to raise multiple tickets and waiting on people and doing a work stream. Essentially, all I care about is agility. So when you when you look at the entire construct here, there's one side of the house which is responsible for keeping the operational hygiene fairly high in the organization, wants to ensure consistency, wants to ensure the right policies, governance, and tags are enforced. And on the other hand, you have the other side of the house which wants to run faster, they want to innovate quicker, and essentially want to be in a self-service mode, right? Not have to go and procure 15 things to get one application now. So that's the whole construct of how Service Catalog is designed, right? So if you go to the next slide, JT.
Yeah, Clive, I was just going to say one quick thing.
Sure.
The whole reason people want to move to cloud is that agility, right? And if we're telling people like, hey, we cannot move fast because we're concerned about security and compliance, it kind of defeats the whole purpose. So so well said that that's what the requirements are, and Service Catalog really kind of enables you that to go control.
And you bring up a good point, JT, right? So and thanks for moving to the next slide. Essentially, what tends to happen, to your point, is, let's take the example of DevOps, right? I mean, you guys have done that, you guys have done that. In the big scheme of things, the way the DevOps team really wants to run, to your point, is they want to run quick, they want to run fast. They don't want to worry about security. They don't want to worry about policy, right? And those are things which, in the big scheme of things, are the yin and the yang of the business. You can't have one without the other. And so you're right. It does kind of come down that path, right? So when we look at Service Catalog, and actually kind of some of your views here, JT, is how important is self-service if you look at it, right, as a one-stop shop, and you talk to your customers, how do you see customers responding to that? And then I'll build a story on that.
Yeah, so I mean, people want, they want IT to offer products, right? They want to go fast, and at the same time, and IT wants to make sure that that every resource that gets launched is meeting the requirements for compliance and also for security. So and that's when we leverage Service Catalog, where we can say, hey, IT is going to offer this as a product, and you can consume it, and a consumer could be like a marketing person or a salesperson. And we've been seeing a lot of traction around salespeople because they're obviously not going to know the complexity of cloud, right? And they're not going to know if they're following the best security policies or not. And even they, as a consumer, could consume products from Service Catalog.
That's right. So, you bring up a good point, and I know there were some pain points Lisa and Karen mentioned earlier in the webinar here, and quite a few of the folks had asked, hey, how do you manage the overall ITSM workflow? Some of the folks had said, hey, I don't really want to worry about policy and enforcement and security, but I just want that to be inherent. And these are some of the things, right, we see the customers actually ask for. And the way Service Catalogs in general, and I'm not talking about AWS Service Catalog here, but just Service Catalogs in general, the expectation always is, hey, you help me standardize developments, standardize deployments, be it a hub and spoke model, or do you want, be it a waterfall process, whatever is implemented inside the organization, right? I want that to be super easy. I want customers to be able to take a particular version of a particular OS with the right set of artifacts, which have been updated because of the InfoSec requirements or some uniqueness to that particular industry. And these are things which happen, right? And from AWS Service Catalog, the way we have been enabling that is all of these are steps, if you will, which can be automated, either through a console or through an API, and then can be linked into an existing tool chain. So when I say that an existing tool chain, so if you kind of move to the next slide here, right? Most of the enterprise customers, mid-market, large or small, they have an existing ITSM play, and I'll come back to that later. But when you look at the actual mechanics, if you will, of what needs to get done in the cloud, is you have to enforce kind of an audit mechanism, right? The way we are seeing large enterprises do it is they do it at a product level, or they do it at an application portfolio level. And when I say product, it can be something as simple as an instance of a SQL Server or an instance of an EC2, or it could be in a complete application portfolio. So think in terms of what a data scientist does, right? They will have a analytics engine in the front. They might have a middle tier in between. They might have a proprietary algorithm stack somewhere in between, and eventually they'll all glue it all together with a database and a backend EC2, right? And that whole stack becomes an application portfolio. Now, within the stack, there are multiple ingredients which have invariably different versions. They have different policy constraints and controls on it. And now you take that particular complexity and you multiply that by n. The n can be 100, or it could be 1,000, or it could be 1,000,000, depending upon the size of the organization and the scale. So you get the idea, right? The scale goes out of control pretty fast. So at least there's a very high probability of that happening. And the way we have been helping large enterprise customers, mid-market customers, and even the progressive forward-looking customers is we enable tags. And think of tags as key value pairs, and it can be something as simple as a cost center. So you have a CC relating to a particular unit within the organization unit, or it can be something as complex as saying that, hey, a particular user group, whatever the definition is, let's call this a user group 1, and then they have a particular value to that. And as to why that's important is when you're looking at the application portfolios, within the construct of an AWS Service Catalog, you can control the accesses, right? You can control which user group, based on their role, based on their project, gets to access what particular asset. And this has been the quintessential requirement of large enterprises. This is where the policy enforcement comes in. The simplistic things like if somebody is in the finance unit of an organization, while they may have a valid business reason to have access to a particular application, they should not, and you don't want them to access something in the analytics side of the house, right? So on and so forth. So there are multiple ways to do that. At the same time, take a step back. You move to the left-hand side of the earlier slide I shared, where the ITSM admins or the operators come in. For them, the bigger concern is while the applications may, probably need compartmentalization, but the individual ingredients, if you will, of the entire stack, they really need to be shared, right? Because it could be policy enforcement. Let me give you an example. Maybe it's an organizational policy that, hey, only Red Hat version 1.1 is allowed inside the entire organization. Oh, by the way, that 1.1 has got a unique secret sauce which the IT department has glued in based on the requirements, right? It could be simple things like I'm going to shut down certain ports. I'm not going to allow certain protocols. I'm not going to allow certain drivers, things of that nature, right? So those are things which can now be enabled. And the biggest scheme which we see on the DevOps side, or the people who consume, is they not only want a console application, they want to be able to integrate it at an API level, right? Think of it, pretty much most of the enhancements or progressions in the cloud today, they happen at the application portfolio stack level. So the integrations happen at the API level. They happen where the integration is actually within the ITSM tools. Think of the ServiceNows, think of the BMCs, think of the Shovels, the Gravitans, or something homegrown, right? So this is where the integration into the tool chain comes in. And in the big scheme of things, where people really care for is, I want something which can be repeated over time. It's a rinse and repeat, right? If I create a particular application stack for a big data analyst, or I create a particular stack for DevOps or a CI/CD pipeline, what have you, they want to be able to do this as a repeatable pattern, not have to go and recreate accounts, not have to go and recreate policies, not have to go and recreate tag options, if you will, for each stack which brings up. And they have multiple, thousands, if not hundreds of them coming up and down, right? So we go to the next slide here. This is where, okay, and I talked about a few of these, Gary, so maybe I'm kind of, I'll kind of go back and forth with you on this one. We talked about ensuring consistency and compliance. As far as automation or deployments are concerned, I'm sure you have seen some too. The thing which I really want to tease out and get your viewpoints is having like a one-stop shop, either through a console or either through an API, and what have you seen, and then we can build a story on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I want to go back to my earlier example, like for example, sales team, where most of the time the sales engineers will not know the complexity of how do you build POC environments. At the same time, business need them to be able to bring POC environments to sell new solutions, right? And this is where we are seeing that people are leveraging Service Catalog, because it's that one-stop shop where you just see all the different products which are available, and one of those could be a POC environment which salesperson could log in and provision that without knowing if it requires encryption at rest, if it requires Kubernetes cluster, if it requires auto scaling, things like that. They can, with one click, they can consume these services and be able to give demo to their customers. So we've seen that quite a bit. And another point here is, most of the time, operational people might not trust to have sales engineers access to AWS, right? With leveraging Service Catalog, you can actually allow them to consume resources and build workflows so they don't actually need write access, but at the same time, they can provision resources. And that's the true power of cloud, right? You want people to go fast, and whether those people be sales or marketing or any finance, right? Or especially as we're moving into serverless type of environment, people are going to be building these small solutions and offering them in Service Catalog. Are you seeing some of that as well?
Yeah, and actually you nailed it, right? And so one of the things which we are seeing, you brought up 2 points I want to dive a little bit deeper on. One is the ability to actually get to a particular application as a one-stop shop. Think of this today, right? I mean, we have a little north of 3,000 plus applications in the AWS marketplace, right? On top of that, we have over 125 AWS services, and we add a bunch of them every year. We move fairly fast. Now, if you were to put on the hat of an ITSM admin or an ITSM persona, if you will, it can get to a nightmare pretty fast, right? You have so many services controlled, you have so many services to enforce policies on. So we are seeing a very strong demand there, where the ITSM experts or the ITSM admin or the Cloud Center of Excellence comes in and says, hey, I want to do this in a controlled manner. And they want to control, hey, not only do I want to enable the one-stop, but I want to worry about the cloud drift and the sprawl and all that stuff, right? However, there is always the tension in the system, if you will, where there's always the devs and the BUs want to move faster, whereas the IT and the ITSM teams want to ensure that the fast does not mean less secure or less operationally, well put together. So this is where, if you look at it, the combination of having that centralized control mechanism to enforce policies, to enforce governance comes in. And that's where Service Catalog essentially helps customers to come in. It kind of helps you the operational hygiene, at the same time, striking a balance between the agility, at the same time coming in and giving them a one-stop shop to pick anything they want, which they know has been curated through the IT best practices within the organization.
Right. And he also mentioned you guys move fast, so that's great. But at the same time, I feel like it causes a lot of confusion and also a lot of sort of security concerns, right? Let's say there's a new service. Most of the time, engineers want to consume it, but at the same time, they might not be aware of the security implications, best practices.
Yeah.
Right?
So I have a point on that. Actually, I have a point on that, Gary. So if you look at that, JT, right? And thanks for bringing this up, by the way. When you and I can go back to the earlier point, there are 125 plus services in AWS. Technically, anybody can get to the AWS console and launch it. Now, that's a nightmare waiting for most ITSM or IT experts, if you will, right? Next thing you know, you have 100,000 fragmented users inside an organization. So the way we are seeing large organizations, the way we are seeing ITSM, Cloud Centers of Excellence actually adopt this, is what they do is they deploy Service Catalog, because Service Catalog essentially becomes the landing zone or the landing point. And it's an assumed role. You don't have a individual user level access. So the way think of it is, if a particular user has not been enabled or has not been essentially vetted by the ITSM community within the organization, they don't even get access to the console. So in many ways, this is a proactive security, right? It's not something where you try to log in and then you get the message saying that, hey, you cannot launch a particular EC2 or your Active Directory / IAM is not letting you do it. With the implementation of service catalogs inside organizations, we are actually finding large ITSM cloud centers of excellence actually use this as a proactive security mechanism too. Literally, you control the access based on the user, not the individual account owner.
Yeah, and more importantly, you're not slowing anyone down, right? You want
Correct.
resources. So that's great. We also have a similar case study from one of our customers. This customer called Vaniti. They're transforming the end-to-end supply chain for cell and gene therapy. They obviously, they're backed by good investors, and they have some very high-profile clients like American Red Cross and Kite Pharma. And when they came to us, they had this requirement. They wanted to be able to rapidly build HIPAA and high-trust environments. Though they have very smart engineers, but they're not so certain that they understand these engineers understand the security on AWS. They also wasn't sure if the developers actually knew AWS CloudFormation really well. And just like any other company, they wanted to make sure they stay on top of the cost. So they wanted to build a system where even any developer, and we've been using the sales example in this scenario, we're having any engineer in the company be able to spin up a HIPAA compliant environment, and at the same time, IT could feel completely good that everything that's coming out of this service catalog environment, it complies with company policies. They're not over provisioning the resources in these high trust environments. So it just really provides that guardrails to make sure that people are still provisioning resources, and at the same time they're complying with company policies. So the way we did it, we leverage Service Catalog, and as you can look at this architecture, it's very complex. In this particular customer, we're using ECS, but for a lot of customers, we're also using Kubernetes. There's databases, there's BPCs, there are different compliance requirements because they're a HIPAA environment, so they need to make sure that database has encryption at rest, even the AMI has encryption at rest, and they're totally isolated, and they wanted to be able to spin up an environment in Europe for GDPR. So this is like fully packaged solution, which they're offering it as a product to their engineers, and we did that with the help of Service Catalog, and on top of that, we're leveraging NOps, our solution, to create like business logics, and we're going to be talking about that in a minute. Clive, is that pretty typical of what you see?
Yeah. So thank you for putting the slide up, by the way. It kind of gives a good context. So here is where I want to kind of tie this conversation back. In the big scheme of things, when you look at what an enterprise organization wants to do, it's at the end of the day, it's solutions, right? And JT's done a great job here at the bottom left here with the persona of a person sitting on the desk, right? Though I would remove the screen and put a laptop, but anyway, in the big scheme of things, this is a fabulous demonstration of what the end persona really cares about, is ability to go and innovate on his work stream very rapidly and not worry about anything on the right-hand side, correct? Now, if you pivot that and you look at the ITSM Cloud Center of Excellence admin, their role is exactly the opposite. They worry about everything on the right-hand side so that the guy on the left-hand side can do these things very simplistically. And we see this come up over and over again. And healthcare, by far, is one of the fastest growing verticals, which is adopting DevOps implementations through HIPAA or HL7. We also see implementations in the G Cloud in Europe, or GPDR, if I said that right. And also we're seeing that come up in APAC, where data sovereignty, just like EMEA, it's extremely important. They care a lot about essentially how the services are managed, how those, the personal information particular to particular patient is anonymized and such. The PII is becoming a big deal. So what tends to happen, to your example, JT here, is they create an entire application stack, and all the policies for the HIPAA or HL7 or anything related to the data sovereignty are enforced in that. So as and when the solutioning starts to happen inside the DevOps, they just do a self-service, not worry about the underlying implications of policy enforcement and security, because guess what? The Cloud Center of Excellence has done it. They have created and curated that catalog, and they've thrown that into the service catalog, right? So it kind of gives them that ability. So it completely abstracts that. Another use case we are seeing, not directly related to healthcare, is financials. The financial industry is one of the most heavily regulated industry in the world. Similar use case, the only thing which changes in the back, to be honest, is the policy enforcement. They still have anonymization and such. It's a little tangential, but you get the idea, right? Anything which is heavily regulated or where you have to enforce policies or enforce mechanisms to ensure that you adhere to organizational sets of security, compliance, what have you. That's where this particular architecture implementation comes in. So you're right.
Right. And most of the infrastructures we're building, they almost look the same, very complex environments. And most of the time, the engineers or the salespeople don't understand the complexity. So wrapping that into a service catalog and offering it as a product actually make it easy. So IT feels good about the compliance and security, and at the same time it's easier for the end users to consume it. And I believe we have to continue to transition more into that sort of a mindset where IT is just publishing products, and I believe the solution like AWS Service Catalog could really help you to enable that. And for this customer, for Vanity, after we were done implementing and automating their infrastructure, the developers were able to spin up environments in 30 minutes. And this is HIPAA compliant environment with probably like 30, 40 different services which are being consumed. So that's huge, right? And now, and I was actually speaking with the customer the other day, was asking them, hey, how come you guys just keep these dev environments around? And they said, we keep these around because it takes us 2 weeks to spin up new environments, so we just don't want to go through that process again. So when you have that kind of agility, when developers are experimenting, bringing up new environments and testing and shutting it down, it just increases productivity and also reduces costs, right? Because it's easy, this is something you do every day. People just say, okay, I'll shut this down and I'll bring it next time whenever I need it. So it has a huge impact on your cost. And we've been talking about compliance because these templates and these service catalogs are built with company best security policies. You feel good. You're building those guardrails, and compliance is sort of built in. It's not afterthought.